Now we turn our attention to my phone, because I have the form that we use was sent to me today. Yeah, I want to get this set up though, and we'll have a Q&A, and there are all 2 questions that are allowed, and both of them are from our shill that we planted among you. Okay, I got it. It's all set. Now, questions? Any children have questions? Ask your parents.
Curious, do you know of any significant study of the history of homosexuality? I know there's little bits and pieces of it, and what I know is interesting, but I don't know of any significant work on it. Do you know?
From a historical view, like where they have been measured in society and its worth, how much out of the closet they've been allowed to be, and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, even their relationship to political activism throughout history and that kind of thing.
Well, that would be a modern phenomenon. No, I don't know of any book that treats that subject. Greg Bonson wrote a book, Homosexuality, A Biblical View, in which he tried to focus on the Bible's regard for that particular behavior. So it's a good place to start. But a historical survey of where homosexuals have fit and how they have maybe lobbied or argued or tried to get out of some of the things they thought were unfair, I don't know of it. But you can be sure there'll be many coming down the pike, all of them written from the sympathetic point of view. Because as homosexuality began to get credibility as an alternative lifestyle, you started hearing everybody and their sister was a homo. You know, this one, Tchaikovsky, and this composer, and that all of a sudden you say, everybody's a Fagala. I thought they were all people. They recruit after they're dead. These people got recruited. Now, of course, some of them may have been homosexual. Some of them may not have been. But that's generally where we got in this historical surveys, who is in the group, who isn't. If I hear something, you give me your email, I'll send you a note, okay? Yes?
I'm just visiting, and I'm glad I did, because that was excellent. Like you said with the lesbian Bible that you have, you try to expose yourself to these things in a legitimate way so you can understand how to combat it. So one of the things that I hear a lot is that a person is born homosexual, and accompanying that are tons of anecdotes, like childhood stories of their first attraction to someone of their same sex. So when I hear stories like that about young children, and then I try to square that with what Romans 1 says about it being a progression down to homosexuality, it's hard to square Romans 1 with the story of a child, you know. So I wonder if you have any tips about how to defend the faith against stories like that. Because you end up having to say, well, you're just lying. You know, the person is lying when they say that.
Well, they may. You can't usually establish a truth when you're arguing with experience. Experience trumps all the other arguments. The person who had the experience, they think they know. And they even dismiss the possibility that they've colored things in their minds a little bit favorable to their arrived at conclusion. But you can begin in your exchanges knowing that it's an absolute falsehood that they're born that way, which is why they work so hard to drill it in, why Lady Gaga was made a song about born this way, born that way, born upside down. And we have to begin with that in order to put it in the category of civil rights as were achieved by the black in the United States. They don't have a chance unless they could piggyback on that. And so they were very careful to insist upon it, but the data is not on their side. the scientific studies which are available do not support the notion that it's born that way, period. And in fact, what they go stark raving mad over is when you demonstrate that there's a consistent pathological background among many homosexual men who had been abused or initiated into that world by an older man who brought them along. That is known, understood to be a pattern that has repeated over and over and over again. If you mention it, they'll want to kill you because that's a real vulnerability, but it remains a real issue. The initiation into the lifestyle, as it were. There's a book written by a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and I can't remember, but he, I thought, did the most responsible treatment of the behavior, likening homosexual behavior to an addiction. And he said he was a Jew, by the way, not a Christian, but he was arguing like a sensible person, saying that you habituate yourself to this behavior, then you identify yourself in terms of it, and some things follow as consequences of that. But it's not like it was compulsive, you had to do it. You chose to do it. Everybody knows this. You know, your wife and you're just about to have an explosive argument. She's just about to tell you something you need to hear. The phone rings. Hello? Boy, what happened to that? I was just going to take my head off a second ago. That phone changed everything. You know, we do control ourselves. But the homosexual wants to say, I can't control this, and then, nor should I. You should approve of it. But it can be controlled. Has anyone noticed that we had a society in which sexual self-control was expected of all growing teens until marriage, despite the boasts and the jockeys and the club mentality? Overall, we expected self-control until marriage. Homosexuals didn't gain acceptance before that was thrown out completely, that you have a right to express your sexual self. And what happened to marriage? Well, marriage was severely discounted before it was given to them. And when it was won, it was a leveraged buyout. And what I mean by that is heterosexuals cheapened marriage terribly in their possession of it, their exclusive domain. And so in the marketplace, you had people looking and saying, this is an undeveloped property here. I could buy this company and I could make the stock much more valuable because these clowns don't know what they're doing. They're sitting on a gold mine. So they go and borrow money and they leverage a buyout. And that's what happened with marriage. Homosexuals looked at marriage, the condition of it, and they said, we can actually get it. And it was in the movement, it was controversial. Many of them said, you're going to bite off more than you can chew. We're going to have a big problem. It's going to backfire on us. We're going to suffer. So there were serious opponents of the strategy. But the ones who were daring, using AIDS as a sympathy lever that got a lot of people feeling sorry for them, and the way that was a disease that you can control and not get by what you do or don't do, is treated as if it's randomly attacking just this population, and there's nothing they can do about it. So people started to feel that, they piggybacked on that, and they made it. They got their goal. Is that anywhere meaningful for you?
Yeah, that does help. I mean, are we saying that progression,
The progression of
can
Romans,
happen very quickly in a child if they're not raised properly?
the progression we read in Romans doesn't happen on a case-by-case basis. Okay? This is talking about societally. As God is met and resisted, then he will give them over to this sort of viewpoint. It doesn't mean each person in that is caught up in the same way. Yeah. You know, you see how I talk about that fine-tooth comb. They don't allow for repentance. Homosexuals know that their born this way thing is threatened if people find out that there have been conversions. So restorative therapy or correctional therapy, the whole, what's that called, the book with the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that names the diseases. The shrinks now, of course, homophobia is in there, but homosexuality is not aberrant. It's not, there's nothing against it. And in some states, and they're looking for federal, if you offer help, you're guilty of a crime. You may not help a homosexual escape from homosexuality because the implication is there's something wrong with it. And we're born that way, so you're only asking for frustration, you see? So these are serious issues, but I want you to see how clever they are. I'll tell you a strange person you might want to look at to talk to. Camille Paglia, Paglia, is the oddest hero that a conservative Christian can have, but I adore her. She's a psychopath and a wonder. The knowledge in this woman's head is unbelievable. She knows a lot of stuff, but she doesn't know how to organize it, just like me. And she's really got her finger on the pulse of a lot of things. And she's a lesbian, by the way, and all in favor of all kinds of dastardly things, but in a way she's libertarian. And when she talks to these homos, they hate her because she says, how could you deny that we have aberrant histories? How could you say that we're born this way? It's ridiculous. She thinks they're cheapening their own experience by denying the truth, and she's right, but they got a pretty cheap experience to begin with. But the point is, you can learn a lot from Camille. And in this new issue of the gender fluidity, she's not where she should be, but she's light years ahead of her contemporaries, because she said, if you have a child who expresses belief that they are a different gender than what they are, and you encourage them, you're guilty of child abuse. Okay? That's not the new acceptable answer. That you must encourage them. You know, what happens when they change their mind after you buy them all the new dresses and everything? They say, no, I changed my mind, I want to go back. Oh, and I changed my mind again, and I changed my mind. What we have then is the outworking of what you read today from Van Prinster. I am God. I determine everything. I determine my gender. I'm sorry that time is really crushing here, but I'm urging you to think this through. The beginning of the Bible deals with, it can't deal with everything all at once. It says God created everything, but it comes to laser focus on man and woman and marriage. That's what everything that follows is built upon. And that is very significant because the battle today is exactly there. If God did not make us male, female, then we have people claiming they made themselves their own gender. So the same claim of I'm born a homosexual is now used from born this gender. Even if it's a gender fluid person, they're saying that's the way I am made. I make myself, I remake myself. So God gets no credit, there's no room for him. He doesn't make male, female, I make male, female. This is a battle for who is God. And you can, as you read the newspaper and then go to read Genesis 3, you'll be astonished at how the devil has continued the same line and gotten so much out of it. The day you eat thereof, you will be free and you'll determine for yourself what's right and wrong. That's what this battle is about. And the gender thing is simply a glory grab, taking from God the very first distinction that we see him making in the human race and say, you're not allowed to make some male, some female. We make it. I saw this pad in Staples, said something like, I created myself. This is ridiculous. So I put it on Facebook to say, this is how stupid these people are. And some guy on my list wrote to me, said, yeah, that's what I think, because I went to the gym and I remade myself. He thought it was a great pad. He wanted to get it because he bought into this nonsense of self-creation, not even realizing the difference between metaphor and reality. But that's what you're looking at, people who want to claim they created themselves. And there's no better area to do it than in gender. If you make your own gender, then your fundamental identity and the way you interact in this world is not from God, but from you. And if that's the case, think about what this does to society. Because all society is predicated upon the treatment accorded to males and females. And now you're not allowed to know whether you're talking to a male or female until they inform you. So all our interaction and conversation is tentative. All relationships are tentative. Let me put it to you this way. You know, when in days past somebody tell you at the office, oh, I'm expecting a baby, you didn't have to wonder. You're happy. Everybody's happy. It's a great new life. Now, with birth control and abortion, and they're told you have to look for the clues. Are you happy about this? You know, do I say, yeah, that's great? Or do I say, oh, what are you going to do? That tentativeness is now applied to all of life. We don't know how to react to anybody for anything. We don't know what part of the package they make it, where this belongs in their lives. You can offend anybody for anything and not know it. So we're all just holding our breath as we talk and engage, because the so-called political correctness owns us as each individual determines for himself what's right and wrong and is unchallengeable in that, and bringing the cops in as soon as they can whenever there's a challenge to that. So these are very interesting times. Have you seen that? Like when you're in a new group, you're trying to get the temperature, trying to see how much can I speak freely around here, and you watch sacrifice somebody else. You say, go ahead, Edith, tell them, you know. See what happens to you when you admit that you're a Christian. We don't know what it's going to be like. And this is true for everybody, not just Christians, but for everybody, because the question of God has been publicly settled. He has nothing to do with us and who we are. That's pretty scary stuff, I think. It makes for chaos, not for community. Community is impossible when we don't even know if we're talking to a girl or a boy. You can't extend the correct courtesies as you understand them. You see? Good. I hope that encourages you too. Oh, I mean, why should you name children? Isn't that unfair? If in the name you give your daughter Bart. What's her name? Bart. What's his name? Linda. I don't know about that. But we should actually say, I'm letting them decide. I'm waiting till they're old enough and they make it, just like these idiots say, but I'm not going to impose my religion on them. I'm going to, let them decide for themselves how wrong they can be. The greatest gift God gives you kids, they're born in a covenant home, you say, I'm going to negate that. No. And so this gender thing, they're actually telling parents how to raise their children apart from the notion of their being male or female. There go the pink rooms, the blue rooms, all thrown away on the agenda. You wanted to ask?
Yeah, I have a quick question. A little in-depth. I'm also visiting, so.
Okay.
But I've kind of been a little confused about what's my role as a Christian in politics, because I kind of grew up in circles where it was talked about a lot, and I feel like a lot of people are like, yeah, we need to stop this and stop this, but sometimes just the fundamentals of the gospel, like living out the gospel, weren't even there. And so I've kind of swung on the other side where it's like, I don't really want to be just oh yeah, America or this or that. I kind of more it's almost like we're trying to produce apples, but we don't have a tree. You know what I mean? Because the root of the problem is people's hearts, and in order for that to change, they need to hear the gospel and come to know God. So,
look at that. Yes. Sorry. That means I have the document.
Okay. So
I think that this is a great question that I would like to pursue with you, but I need to do it offline, as it were, so that we can ask the questions that are pertinent for you in your situation. But we don't look to the public policy realm for the gospel solution to be normatized for the whole culture. We look to the gospel to be the presupposition of subsequent legislation and so on. But that's a lot of work to get to that point again, if it ever can be recovered. But yeah, there's a great deal of work to do in public policy and in politics, and I think that if you're interested in it, you should certainly consider pursuing it. But local is better, first of all, and you have to be going with your eyes open to know how guarded that gate is and how they are looking for people to be apostate from day one, flexible and open to the wrong things. So how you could manage, I think it can be done, but it takes a particular set of gifts, I suppose, that you have to ask yourself if you possess them, and where then your service might be most likely to be successful, to be fruitful. But yes, if you and 1,000 like you have this urge to be involved in that realm, you should go in with clarity of thought and knowing what it is you believe and want to accomplish, and then face the reality of where some contribution might be made successfully. I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Schlissel, my last name, at AOL.com, okay? And just tell me that we were together in Pennsylvania. This is Pennsylvania, right? Yeah. Okay, more questions? More hostility? More far-ranging thoughts that are disconnected entirely from any subject? Any pink bows? Yes.
Some of us have, I have a brother who has a homosexual nephew by marriage. And that person has woven in and out of their lives throughout the year and become a very bad influence on his children. So how all of us at some point either are related to or know or have friends that are homosexual, and how do we promote the gospel with them, while not approving of their lifestyle in the way that the Bible presents their lifestyle to us as kind of a sin that is treated a little differently than the rest of the way that we break God's law.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I found myself, not by design, but being asked these questions by a number of people from disparate circumstances, like, what do I do with this homo brother-in-law who has always been welcomed at our house, and now he's gotten married over in Europe, and they're coming to visit, and I don't know what to do. So I'm thinking that we should write a little book on this, like a Dear Abby for the 2018, you know? Because the questions that we're facing, the problems that we're facing, are far more acute and different than the social etiquette problems we had at another time. The basics are you have to be faithful, you can't compromise. The trend that I see that disturbs me is Christians thinking that they have to accept the definition of terms offered by the pervert. So the one who's sinning becomes deferred to because it's their day, it's their party. So they think they're entitled to impose that definition on the family. But I think that you, as a member of Christ, have a prior right, and you certainly have a right regarding what is in your home, what is accepted in your home. So you can be decent, and you can be civil, and you could be kind to people who are dead wrong and evil people, but you can't treat them or permit them to be seen in your family as if they're normal and just like anybody else. So some of the discussion is not going to be in their presence. It's going to be training your children on what Johnny has done to our family by his behavior. And my discussion with you now is evidence of the kinds of problems that we have, but we love Johnny, and we're hoping that Johnny recovers his senses and is returning to Christ and to normalcy. But in the meantime, we go as far as we can. We go as far as we can, but we don't sacrifice our children on the altar of political correctness or anything else. We keep them faithful. And don't be so afraid of offending them. They're not afraid of offending you. And that's hard for us to get because we still rely on that old ethic, which is, by the way, thoroughly Christian. You know, in our church, I make a big fuss about common courtesies, manners, because I think they are tied to our faith. They really belong to the Christian worldview. Count others more important than yourself, Paul says. That is the whole of Emily Post in a nutshell. You're looking to make other people comfortable. And we are comfortable doing that. But when it comes to making wicked God haters comfortable, we have to pause and think, is there a better way to handle this? And I think there often is a better way. We need to talk about it and explore it. As much openness as possible with Johnny, the pervert, but not allowing him to imagine that he can change the rules in your household or have at your children for indoctrination or anything else, you know. So in that situation that I was talking about before when the guy got married, a professional person as a doctorate and all, he chose not to go visit them because he was offended that they didn't warmly embrace his announcement, you know. And that, I think, will happen much of the time. Is they'll decide to have nothing to do with us or to minimize the contact. But just be faithful. No matter what, you start with, how do I be faithful to God? That's the first question. And if you can help people along the way, great. If you can't, well, then that's also what might be. But faithfulness is what we're talking about. Did I get anywhere near an answer? Okay. Anybody on this side of the room? Okay, you guys. No, I know, I'm only kidding. Mom's going to tickle you under your arm. Will you do that again? No? All right. No? Yes.
You said that claiming our own civil right of being of our religion is not a winning strategy for fighting against the so-called civil right of homosexuality. You said that. Could you elaborate on that and your view on the winning strategy?
I can elaborate on it briefly. I think it's a wrong-headed approach because it narrows the issue to something it is not. It is buying into their definition of the problem by saying that you want your personal religious conviction to trump my civil right. And we've effectively granted them that our religious conviction is not synonymous with our civil right. So we argue as if religion were an add-on, something extra that can be present or not present. And it's because they believe that and they discuss the question, if we go along with that discussion without challenging that fundamental flaw, that my religion is not an add-on, it's not optional, it's not some right that comes, it's a pre-right right. So in our declaration it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Those rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or wealth, or property, predate civil government. Civil government may be instituted to protect those rights, but they don't come from the civil government. You understand? That's what's so difficult about this situation. We're talking to people who have no comfort in that zone of knowing that it's mocked, it's laughed at. When somebody says, It happened recently. Oh, and Judge Roy Moore, he was saying that our rights don't come from the government, they come from God. And Time magazine had a field day with him because they were completely unable to grasp what he was saying. They lacked the facility to interpret his words because it's completely foreign to them that there are rights that are not tied and linked and emanating from the government. That's where your rights come from, because that's what we control. But he was saying something that's grade school true. We start with rights. The right to keep and bear arms, the right to defend yourself, comes before a government is instituted to ensure, as best as possible, the furtherance and the maintenance of those rights. So I think we need to be careful in engaging on this stuff here with my right versus your right, that we don't give away the store. And so how it could happen is a number of ways, but you got what I was trying to say. That is correct. And we need to be cautious. Our strategy, the Boy Scouts had this too. When they were dealing with they buckled to the homo pressure a long time ago. I think it was in the 90s, right? When they accommodated, they said, okay, we'll compromise. We'll let gays be troop leaders. How's that? Said, oh, that's perfect. You're nuts. What are you talking about? You couldn't have made a worse decision. But it was the right of people to practice their religion and the right of these homosexuals to practice their, civil rights. So each time, and you'll see this, I'm sorry to say, it will be structured in the press as his personal religious make-up fantasy belief versus his rock-solid constitutionally protected right. So you have a make-believe right, they have a real right. And every time we accommodate this way of looking at things, we embed it further into the culture. So it has to be made crystal clear. The rights we care about most are those that are not created by the government, but that we use human government to guard and protect. Once you start a society without God as your indispensable presupposition, you're in a tyranny. That is the definition. There's no court of appeal. There's no higher power. It's human beings run the show. You must even theoretically have under God, or you're lost. So whether you're consistent, inconsistent, you need to have that in place. Under God, there's somebody above the human government. Because that's been the issue throughout history. When you displace God, the government becomes God, effectively. I mean, don't we see it? It's the word of God, their latest edicts, their latest issues. Yes?
So you said earlier that it was a shame that we're not out there protesting. You talk about the homosexuals, you talk about all of these issues, civil rights, but to boil it down, you're saying start with the family. That's where it's got to start. It's got to just push everything else away, bring it back to the family. If we can't do it right there, we might as well give up.
That's right. And it's easy to use excuses for fumbling there, saying, oh, the pressures around me are so great, my head is too distracted. That's not good enough. You're right, family is your daddy, you got to take care of your family, number one, number two, number three, your wife and your kids. But that doesn't mean you have no other responsibilities. You're interfacing with the world on behalf of your family all the time. And what I meant was simply that the protests that we hear from the left, they're very ready to make them, they're unashamed to squawk and to scream and to holler for Mickey Mouse imagined offenses. But when God, our God, was truly trashed in the public eyes, we didn't do anything at all, not even a burp. It was a national disgrace. And so when they do those kinds of things and they notice we can get away with this, the time is right for further abuse. Because without pushback, they just steamroll. you know. So some of the political activity will be seemingly futile, but it may actually be doing a great deal of good. Forestalling what even might be inevitable, looked at a certain way, but keeping it at bay is a good thing. Keeping evil from swallowing us up. And it's not the place to talk about it, but I do think compromise does belong in the political realm. It's a good thing, it's a technique, and we should learn to use it. I think that sometimes we make mistakes in our failure to be willing to compromise, but it belongs, again, to the setting. What is the setting that we're looking into when we're talking about compromise? All I mean to say is it's fine to excuse yourself that I couldn't do anything because we were bullheaded and stubborn, not because we were right necessarily. So strategically, we should always want to learn more, and we should be willing to listen to people, even wrong people, even me. So that's, yes, it comes down to your family and your role in the family. But what's the family now? I tell you, 1990, George Grant was on the conference. The issues were the same then. I said, New York City is messing around with definitions that are going to affect everybody. You can't needle these definitions and change things and just think it's like anything. No, this is life and death. So we got to get it right. And that means it requires thought. It calls for thought, and it's good to think. I think it's good to think. My wife told me I should go think and come in for dinner. So I try to listen to my wife. God said, do what your wife Sarah tells you to do. I know guys only know one passage in the Bible for sure. Wife, submit to your husband, hear me? That's it. They forgot God told Abraham, do whatever your wife says. Yes, Lord. And the women say, really? We can do that? Well, you could cite it just like he cites his. And while he's looking it up, you go do what you want. What you want 9 times out of 10 is right anyway. That's it. See, I think to me, it's patently obvious that women are superior. They're not equal. When they argue for equality, they're idiots because it's a step down. To be equal with men is to be declining in value. God saved the best for last. The most complex, the most inscrutable, the most wonderful, the most intuitive, the most helpful, the best looking creature in the world was the last of his work. And I think there it is. What's there to argue about? So when they talk about equality, just why would you do that? Don't you know how special you are? It's wrong. Sometime you have me back if you're patient enough with me, and I'll tell you about the structure of the way God ordered things in the garden and the character of the revolution that was introduced. It is the identical thing that's going on today, and what God's solution in the garden was. But you don't want to hear it now, do you? Good.
Probably not.
Good. It's one of those Dutch insights. They're really good at creation and the last things too, but I don't know about the last. Yes. Okay, so we're ready to roll. Are we? Am I stepping on anybody's toes? No, good. Now,